Me baka wa baka rita ka tiko ni au, na baka tangita ka ni ngonda sana baka rorongo sa ramandani, ki nandua na Veitalanoa ke toa baka idora tiko na madha o sawati, Veitalanoa go, mai liu taka tiko na Ethnic Media Services, e na liu taki na nonrito sasanga tiko na Ethnic Media Services me mai Veitalanoa taki, vekenda na itau kei, vekenda na kaiwiti kanda sa ngole mai inda sa mai baka tiko na panoa liabongo Amerika, ndua na ulutanga ka Veitalanoa taki sara tiko baka lebu, o bambota na ngona saramatanga go e lebu sara tiko na kia na Veitalanoa taki se na kia na sangai tiko da sarida e na bebono e so da rongo tiko na news da baka mure tiko na itukutuku se ngolanga na nonda na bebono e da tiko kina e sei burubura tali so na be sei burubura tali so ai na kia na sa tumbu taki tanga na veidadati koia e ramba i levu e titombu, ulutanga ramba i levu, ulutanga e titombu sara, ka ke tuna numa ni ngoa se ngai kene matai ni Veitalana kena Veitalanoa taki na ulutanga ngoa na Stop the Hate. Wekenda tau na itau kei, ka rauni na ngai tomani tiko yani, na ngai rauni tau na ngai waka dikeawa tiko yani na kena na ulutanga ngoa me waka utukuna ni ramba i levu ka titombu. E rauni tau na ngai reida tali tiko yani na Veitambane so. Na vida na madha o mai ngoa, ke waka arito na ndua wata tiko me kena na Ethnic Media Services, serto na lewa mai, serto na numa na Ethnic Media Services ni na dondonu me na me Veitalanoa taki tiko. Ia, ke tō Veitalanoa e na madha sawati, na wekenda tau na i tau kei, wekenda na keiwiti e senga soti ni tōndo wake la waka levu na racial discrimination, se na vida dhatim beka wa kautamata, se na viva kandui takim beka wa kautamata, tō senga soti ni tōndo wake la, me waka toto wata taki ke ira na kai rani kana ke Amerika loloa, se o ira beka na kai na Mexican, Spanish, se o ira tale na Asia, e rawake la Sarava ka levu ira, ia wekenda tō, koe ana ka ke tō mai wakarita ka tiko, ke na Ethnic Media Services, ni o kenda tō, senga soti ni tō wake la, ia de raumbeka ni rawake la tu e so, ka rawenga rawi tō ana tambana, ka tō mai wenga rawi kina waka levu ni tō kei o ana tambana ni wenga rawi, sen caregiving. Ia, na madha sawati ke tō mai Veitalanoa tiko, ke nei liu ni Porokaramungo, Mr. Julian Do and Ethnic Media Services. Wakatalinga kina Miss Winnifred, dua na lawyer mai na Asian Law Caucus. Ka wakatalinga kina o Mrs. Mereani Ikanivere, dua na itoke ni Prestige Homecare mai Petaluma. Prestige Homecare na caregiving service agency mai Petaluma, sa rosanga bulu baka dhadha na kia na didi tuku mai na agency ongo, nono benga rabi boli tuku mai na marama ni roi matuku lau, na vonoli bongo California, ka mbuta bina katu, na tambana ongo na tambana ni venga rabi na caregiving, da rauni wakantina ndina takatali tungai, do talenga na kai rauni nda baka binibina katukina ni sa libu sarutiko na itoke, sa mai wakandurin business tiko, ra wakandurin business sartungai na tambanongo, na tambana ni venga rabi se na caregiving, libu sari California, kana mai wakaitai tali tungai ni kina, na turanga ni ta Akuila Vuira, e na Veitalanoa ke tō me wakaidora, e na madha o sawoti, ke wakao ni na wakarorongo mai ni rautalanga ni wakaitabi me kina na nomu ni wala mai na taro se sombeka na nomu ni waka sama sombeka na kau ni na o ni lakuduruma mbeka na wano ni dhaka so se sombeka na kau ni viataronga mai me wakani na wakaitabi talitungan kina wakamadhala talitungan ni kina na o Miss Winnifred na lawyer mai na Asian Law Caucus kana wakamatata takatalanga ni o koe na Donu Vaka tamata dhaka se manitiko na peapa se senga. Ia ndona ka e ndondonu mentana ki la tiko. Ka ndona ka ndo waka binibina ka tukina, ka ndo talanoa taka waka levu o senga ni na oda na ndauda wuta tiko ngoa na ni o kianta tau na mai tau iawu i California. Tau tuku ni tu California e wakatu e ndona mata ni tu ngā wakata ki koe. Ndo tiu ngā na wanua ngā se na country of its own ndo tuku ni tu. E na levu ni ndondonu e ndau tu taka tiko o California e na wakun tunda na kautamata kandalako mai na visa i wurawura taliso Ian da sa rongo da saramandeani o via tokarua takatale ke wakao ni wakarorongo tiku mai na Veitalanoa ni wakongeti so mbeka na kau ni lako duruma na vibono ni takatake so o ni via taronga mbeka se o ni via wasia mai raundi o ni wala talinga mai se tu mbeka na kau ni via soli waka sama mikina koia kere ke ni ninge wala mai ke wakao ni senga ni vina kata me wili ko wura na nomu ni waka sama se na kau ni via wasia mai raundi o ninge inbox mai and radio Donu Vaka se ni volanga mai biau una vuninda kua. Gonna Veitalanoa ni Stop the Hate mai berto na Ethnic Media Services.
And Una, please start.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all the panelists that are present in our session today. Also, a very warm welcome to those of you who will get to listen to this recording. This would be the first session of Stop the Hate series initiated by the Ethnic Media Services and hopefully the first of many. I would like to first of all introduce Julian Do. He's a co-director of Ethnic Media Services, a national coalition of ethnic media, and he's also the director of EMS Stop the Hate program.
Great. Thank you so much, Una. Like Una said, my name is Julian Do, co-director of EMS and head of the Stop the Hate program there. EMS is a national coalition of ethnic media with headquarters in San Francisco. We have been part of the Stop the Hate initiative administered by the California State Library under the API Equity Fund. This program is designed to address hate crimes, incidences, civil rights, and institutional racism aimed at diverse and underserved communities throughout California. Today's discussions is part of our collaboration series between ethnic media and nonprofit community-based organizations to jointly address hate and civil rights issues because the challenges are so great that no organizations or sector can do this alone. So EMS is pleased to partner with Radio Fiji and the Asian Americans Advancing Justice to focus on the Pacific Islanders caregivers, many of whom have experienced labor abuses, economic exploitations, and hate issues. Our discussion will also present information on resources and services that affected caregivers could access to protect themselves and improve the situations. Thank you, Una, and back to you.
Thank you, Julian. Also present with us today is Mrs. Mereani Ikanivere, who is also a former caregiver and current owner of Prestige in-home care based out of Petaluma. I would like to turn the time over to Mrs. Ikanivere to share a little about herself and her company.
Mariana, you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Juliet and Winnie and also Radio Donu Vaka for this collective opportunity to share the state of caregiving amongst the Pacific Islanders in the U.S. and more specifically for our Fijian community. I'm Mereani Ikanivere, and I am the owner of the Prestige Homecare, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss this because caregiving is the core of most Fijian families here in the U.S. And having this platform to highlight and amplify the business of Fijian caregiving in America is critical because it carries with attitudes, beliefs, and practices that can be starkly different from those of the general U.S. population. And it also carries many rewards to having Fijian caregivers to look after elderly and loved ones in American families. As you know, the Fijian people, we are naturally very happy people, hospitable, compassionate, and we're very loving. And part of this, it's emanates from these multi-generational styles of communal living, which is living with extended families and having responsibility to look after parents and elderlies. So this spirit fosters unbreakable ties and a tight-knit community like no other. So resources are shared to ensure no one goes without. And in times of hardship, people pull together to confirm just how strong Fiji community spirit really is. So it is this loving and caring spirit that they carry with them wherever they go. And it certainly transcends into the business of caregiver in the US. So if you're looking for the caregiver, and I can recommend that the Fijian caregivers are one of the best. And also you can look into the Fijian caregiving agencies. And I have been involving in caregiving both as a caregiver and also as an employer for more than 20 years. And I must say that it's not always a smooth sailing um, undertaking. It requires and demands a lot. For caregivers, it requires a lot of patience, compassion, love, empathy, diligence, and one must possess a wide range of problem-solving skills. And as for employer, we are mindful of the challenges that caregivers faces and trying to find the balance to negotiate a win-win contract between us, the employer, clients, and the employees. At the outset, it would be remiss of me not to mention that not all clients can afford the rates which most caregivers have come to feel or think that we are entitled to. For instance, some feel that they are entitled to get this much pay. So in that, that is not always the case. When we negotiate contract with a client, we of course look at the ability to the standard rate for the level of care. And as I have alluded to before, because we are very loving and caring people, we have to be kind and considerate of families who desperately need the care but do not have the financial resources to foot the bills. So as the agency owner, I have been at the forefront of this situation because I fully empathize with the client, and we try our best to come to the consensus and mutually agreeable term that will satisfy all parties, clients, caregivers, and the employer. So when I draw up the contract for the caregiver, we explain these terms to them, and if they agree, they can sign on with us. If not, they are free to look for other caregiving agencies that offers better remuneration. So that's for the caregiver. And for us, we take into consideration the humane side of the caregiving that will provide a practical and rewarding way for all parties. Of course, I know the rewards may not be immediate for my company, but I believe and have witnessed how my company has evolved and grown through these years when I'm guided by the principle of love and care for those who need it most. So the challenges along the way with regards to caregiving is the communication is the key. And I believe that good communication strategy is important as an employer. And we need to keep clients and caregiver informed of trends or innovative ways to caregiving to avoid any mishaps in the workplaces and also avoid burned out. As for the caregiver, overworked and they need their rest or time out. And caregivers can only do so much, but we are only humans, so we have limitations. We need time out to enjoy, to meet friends and families, or taking vacations. So this provides that critical space to rejuvenate and come back better, prepared to resume work. So I know at times some caregivers feel they can do a live-in case for 7 days. Whilst this was the case for some of our caregivers in the past, we have had to change strategy to avoid caregiver burnout and other associated challenges. It is also critical for employers to know their caregivers and what they are capable of. And this helps a lot in identifying or assigning a caregiver to a client. For instance, when I assess a case, I could figure out who I will assign to look after the client. The caregiver I appoint is not only an ambassador of my company, but a representative of Fiji caregivers in general. So they will carry with them the qualities and virtues that are unique and distinct among other caregivers, because they're very respectful, kind, and hardworking. And they take extra mile and initiative to do other things to make life easy and enjoyable for the client. So that's a quality unheard of and rare among those in the caregiving business, where most go in and just stick into the job description. So it's the extras that makes the client's families appreciate our duty of care, and we leave behind the indelible memories of how their loved ones were provided the best care, and the good deeds don't go unnoticed. And I'm thankful for the Fijian community that makes all of this possible, and I'm incredibly proud of the community that supported me and other caregivers in the industries. And I understand that they have some challenges that that we are going through, and I think that we are going to discuss about it during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mereani, Mrs. Mereani Ikanivere of the Prestige in Home Care. We're also very fortunate today to have Akuila with us. And the reason why I say that we're fortunate, because when we're thinking caregiver, when you hear caregiver, we're always like thinking it's a female. So that's why I said today we're very fortunate to have Akuila with us, Mr. Akuila, who is also a caregiver, and we would like to ask him to share his testimonial on the experiences that he's had since he's been a caregiver and since he first arrived in California, why he decided to take this route to be a caregiver, and if he has experienced any experiences with racism, hate incidences, maltreatments, and maybe economic exploitation that he has been exposed to, and any types of stress and trauma that he could share, and the kind of help he would like to receive as a caregiver. Mr. Akuila.
Thank you, Una. Bulupinaga, everyone. I take this opportunity to thank this forum for reaching out to highlight the importance of caregiving as a great calling to most Fijians that reside here in California. I refer to caregiving as a great calling for Fijians because I know that the duty of care is embedded in our DNA. It's something that comes naturally to us, and as Mereani had alluded to, because of the multi-generational style of living, we all pitch in to look after the children and elderly in our homes way back in Fiji before we came to the US. And as professing Christians, we are guided by the golden rule in the Bible that says, do unto others what you'd have them do to you. So we feel a deep connection with the clients, and there's filial piety. That we treat our clients like our own family, and it's what makes the Fijian caregiver different. I came to the US 10 years ago, and along the way I've learned a lot of things about caregiving. Whilst the duty of care comes naturally to us, we still have to undergo professional training and obtain certifications and pass certain health tests in order to become a caregiver. And at the same time, we try to keep a good rapport with clients and caregiving agencies. I'm reminded that we don't have to put all our eggs in one basket, so we keep registering our interest with other caregiving agencies in order to, secure jobs because of the unpredictable nature of this business, where, one day you'll be happy with a client, and the next day he'll probably be gone. So it's always best that you keep a good rapport, a good working relationship with other caregiving agencies and fellow caregivers who would be able to share with you opportunities job opportunities that do crop up here and now and then. I've also taken a keen interest in looking after different types of clients with challenging and varying degrees of care. So I found myself I thrive on challenging or pressure situations, so I'm always finding ways to keep myself busy. A good caregiver is kept abreast with the latest info on care. So I subscribe to channels and email distribution lists so I can read up on various topics of interest, especially with caregiving. And I'm a firm believer in sharing what you know. Knowledge is power, and a little help always goes a long way. So over the years, I have witnessed how Fijian caregivers have been able to successfully complete targeted projects back in Fiji. And some have set up their businesses, some have built their houses, while some have made investments in stock or elsewhere. So whatever targets and projects we envision, we try our best to achieve them. It's not always easy. A lot of sacrifices have to be made. People come here to work and make money to upgrade their living standards at home. So you don't see this kind of paycheck back home, but I must add that the Fijian caregivers in the US have had their share of critics and what they call noisemakers on social media, that this is a job that's looked down upon. You're changing diapers and cleaning up clients, but hey, isn't this what we do back home as well? But our parents did this kind of care. So it's a great calling, and we love every bit of it. It's putting food on the table, it's paying for the bills, and of course we are actively contributing towards Fiji's economy and remittances. And I must thank you once again for this opportunity. It's a critical platform to raise awareness about exceptional services of Fijian caregivers in the US and their contribution to healthcare in America. It's something that's ingrained in us, and we are reminded that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. That's from Mark chapter 10, verse 45. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akuila. And lastly, I would like to also introduce to you Miss Winnie Cow. Winnie is an attorney at law, and she is with the Asian Americans Advancing Justice. I would like to ask Winnie if she could introduce herself and share with us a little about her organization and how that all ties into this conversation.
Thanks, Una. My name is Winnie Gao, and I lead the Workers' Rights Program at the Asian Law Caucus. Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Asian Law Caucus is our full name, but we refer to ourselves just as the Asian Law Caucus for short. But we're a community-based legal services organization. We're located in San Francisco. And our workers' rights program advocates on behalf of low-income, low-wage immigrant workers on a wide range of workplace issues through direct representation, through impact litigation, policy work, and also just community education and outreach work. A lot of the workers that come to us with help around unpaid wages, retaliation, discrimination, sexual harassment, and workplace health and safety violations, just to name a few issues. But the vast majority of the clients we see are Asian immigrant workers. Most are either monolingual in an Asian language or have only limited English proficiency. So a lot of the folks we see are cooks. They might be dishwashers, janitors, drivers, domestic workers, and definitely caregivers. I'm excited to have the chance to be here today because definitely from what we've seen through our work, caregivers are among the most exploited workers that we see. I think, like the other speakers mentioned, the work that caregivers do is so important. It's so intimate and so closely tied with their clients and the families that they're supporting at their loved ones' most vulnerable moments. But that work by its nature is very demanding, both emotionally and physically. It's also really hard for the workers because they're isolated in homes. They don't have coworkers in the same sense that a lot of us do. And I think because of the nature of the work and just the big hearts that a lot of caregivers have, they may allow for a lot of mistreatment, or that I want to make sure that caregivers know about what their rights are, because at the same time that they're caring for the loved one or for the family, they also need to care for themselves. One of the biggest issues that we see with caregivers is the issue of wage theft, that they're not properly paid for the work that they do. So something that we do want to make sure that all caregivers know is that as a general matter, most caregivers are entitled to be paid at least the minimum wage for every hour that they work. There are definitely some exceptions to that under both federal and state law, but those exceptions are relatively limited. But in terms of what an hour worked is, an hour worked is any time when the caregiver is doing work tasks for the loved one, or it can also be time when the caregiver is subject to the control of the employer, when they're just not free to leave or do their own activities. So importantly, that can include time when the caregiver may not be actively doing something for the patient, but when they're required to stay with the patient. They're required to be ready and available to respond to the patient in case the patient needs them. That time when the caregiver is engaged to wait and be there and be available is work time that should be properly compensated at least the minimum wage rate. I think the other thing that's important is that caregivers should know you can't waive your right to the minimum wage. Sometimes we see caregivers who come in and say, well, I agreed to a flat monthly rate, or I agreed to a flat weekly or daily rate no matter what the number of hours I work. It doesn't matter. Even if you agreed to that or sign a contract about that, if you're a covered employee, you're entitled to the minimum wage. It has to work out that the flat monthly rate, if you divide it by the actual number of hours you work, that it has to work out to at least the minimum wage for every hour, or there's a violation. So the minimum wage that applies depends on where you work. There's a federal minimum wage that applies across the country as a baseline. It's actually ridiculously low. It's $7.25 an hour. But lots of states, including California, where I practice, have higher state minimum wages. California's minimum wage rate right now is $15.50 an hour, so much higher than the federal minimum wage rate. And some cities have even higher minimum wage rates. San Francisco's minimum wage, for example, right now is $18.07 an hour. So it's not just minimum wage that caregivers should think about. As a general rule, employees, including caregivers, are also entitled to overtime pay. The amount of overtime that caregivers are entitled to depends on a lot of different factors. But under federal law, caregivers are generally entitled to overtime pay at time and a half your regular hourly rate for any hours worked over 40 in a work week. That's certainly true for caregivers that work through an agency. Now, there are exceptions, so you should get a consult with a legal advocate to figure out what your particular situation is. But overtime is something that caregivers should try to find out more what their rights are, because it is definitely a factor for a lot of caregivers. And in fact, in some states, the overtime protections are much more rigorous. In California, for example, some caregivers are entitled not just to weekly overtime, but in some instances, they're also entitled to what we call daily overtime, or overtime for hours worked more than 8 or 9 in a day. And in some cases, even double overtime. So overtime at the rate of 2 times your regular rate if you work more than 12 hours in a day, or in some cases more than 8 or 9 hours on a 6th or 7th consecutive workday. So again, what overtime applies depends on where the caregiver works, whether they live in the home that they're working in or not, and what their duties are. So It's something that caregivers should try to get a confidential legal consult from an organization like mine or some other legal services organization to find out more what you might be entitled to. I think, you know, we've been talking a little bit about just the demands of the work and just the hours. So many caregivers are working around the clock. They're living in the home that they're working in. And so there have been questions that caregivers have raised to us about, you know, what kind of rest am I entitled to? Is it lawful that the employer is making me work 7 days a week or 24 hours a day? Under the federal law, unfortunately, there is not a limit to the number of days that an employer can ask you to work each week, but state laws can be different. So again, in California, we're lucky. We have really great protections for workers, relatively speaking. In California, it is unlawful for an employer to make you work more than 6 days a week, unless you're working less than 30 hours in the week overall. So in California, employees, including caregivers, are supposed to get at least 1 day of rest each week. Now, that doesn't mean that a worker can't choose to work 7 days in a row, but under the state law, they can't be required to do that. And then, as mentioned before, if a caregiver is working a 6th or a 7th consecutive day in a row, then in most cases, there should be overtime paid. So the caregiver should try to find out more about their rights to overtime that needs to be paid to them for all those extra hours. In addition, in California, for most employees, employers are supposed to give the worker, the caregiver, a 30-minute off-duty meal period for every 5 hours they work. In California, employees are also supposed to get a 10-minute off-duty rest period for every major fraction of 4 hours that they work. So in some instances, there can be on-duty meal periods or meal periods where you're still working while you're eating. They can be permissible in certain circumstances if the nature of the work demands it, but only if the employee voluntarily agrees in writing to do an on-duty meal period, on-duty meal break. So again, these kinds of rest requirements, they're not only for the health of the worker, it's also so that they're able to do the work well and provide the kind of care that's needed, that they're well rested so that they can do the caregiving that's being asked for. Another general topic that comes up a lot in the consults that we provide for caregivers, and you know, Julian, you were asking a little bit about just abuse and mistreatment of caregivers. I think that's a really important topic, and I know, you know, you're probably going to take us through a little bit more of that, but one general concept that comes up a lot in our consults that is really frustrating for us as workers' rights advocates and also for the workers that we're talking to is that the law is actually not caught up, I think, to the protections we wish that it provided for workers. A lot of most employees actually in the country are what are referred to as at-will employees. Most caregivers are at-will employees. Folks may have heard that term before. I'm an at-will employee, but what it means to be an at-will employee is that an employer can change the terms and conditions of our work or fire us or like suspend us or change our work assignments at will. They can do that for any reason or even no reason, as long as the reason is not unlawful. As long as there's not some other law that says you can't do this for the reason that you're doing it. So what that means is that it allows for a lot of really bad management and unfair treatment. And maybe I should say, an at-will employee is different than a worker who's part of a union. So under union contracts, an employer can't just change the terms and conditions of your work or just fire you for any reason or no reason. They have to have a just cause reason, a good reason for the change or for the firing. That's one reason why unions are so important for workers, why they make such a big difference for workers, and why some employers push back against unions so much. But most of us as at-will employees, we don't have that just cause protection, and we are subject to a lot of unfair treatment and bad management. So it wouldn't be unfair, for example, if my boss belittled me and just treated me with disrespect just because my boss is a bad manager and doesn't like me and puts me down. That isn't necessarily unlawful. It's definitely unfair. It's abusive, but it doesn't necessarily create a legal claim that you can sue on. The law doesn't go in and regulate every interaction between a boss and the worker. But there are certain interactions that cross from being unfair to an abuse, bad management, to being unlawful. And that can include discrimination or harassment or abuse because of your race or your national origin or your sex or some other part of your fixed identity. And so that gets into kind of the hate issues or discrimination issues that Julian was mentioning at the beginning of the discussion. If an employer is belittling you, making verbal comments about your race or your national origin or your sex, or harassing you because of those aspects of your identity, then that is illegal and unlawful, and something that is not that you should seek a legal consult about. If you're working for an agency and some of those things are happening, then you should report it to your agency. The agency can, in some cases, be liable for that kind of race or national origin discrimination or sex discrimination if they knew about the abuse and then didn't do anything about it, didn't take any reasonable steps to address it. In some states like California, we have state laws that protect you from harassment and discrimination based on race or national origin or sex, even if you don't work for an agency, even if it's just a one-on-one relationship. Our state laws extend even to that one-on-one employment situation if harassment is involved. So you should get a legal consult and find out what your options are. It's not okay for an employer to treat you in that abusive way. There are other things I can mention, but I know I've been talking for a long time. So maybe I should turn it back to you for it.
And we've enjoyed listening to everything that you've been sharing with us, Winnie. One thing I wanted to bring up is immigration. If you could touch a little on that, please.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the workers that we see may have immigration issues, like they don't have immigration status or are working without work authorization. But something that I want people to know is that all the rights I just talked about, the right to be properly paid, the right to be able to work in a workplace free of race or national origin or other kinds of discrimination and harassment, they apply regardless of immigration status. It doesn't matter if you are undocumented or you're working under the table, you are entitled to be properly paid for the work that you did according to the law, and also to be free of discrimination while you're doing that work. So you should talk with an attorney about it. A lot of the government agencies that enforce these wage and hour laws or anti-discrimination laws have specific protections where they don't ask about immigration status, and in fact, there is authority that that is improper. And some states have even more protections. In California, for example, it's unlawful for an employer to retaliate against you on the basis of immigration, or to lodge any kind of immigration-related threats against you. For example, we've had clients who've been caregivers who the employer told them, if you say anything to the government agencies, I'm going to report you to ICE. That kind of immigration-related threat in California is unlawful. And in fact, if the employer does that, threatens the worker in that way, that kind of abuse can be the basis potentially of a U visa, a particular kind of visa that is victims of certain kinds of crime can be eligible for. And so while we, certainly it's horrible when retaliation happens, when it does happen, sometimes actually it might, this particular kind of retaliation, immigration-related retaliation, can actually be the basis for a U visa. It's something that the worker should see an immigration attorney about to find out more information.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Julian, did you want to say something? I just have one more question for Winnie, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, please.
So you touched on at-will employee, and I think I might have mentioned earlier that really another takeaway, or something that I would like us to take away, and our listeners as well, from this conversation, is finding the balance. And when I say finding the balance, I am talking about caregivers, I'm talking about clients and agencies, caregiving agencies, because we have a lot of Fijian caregiving agencies that we're so proud of, that, coming from a small country such as Fiji to this big nation and being able to start their own businesses is really commendable. And there's so much issue there, so much deeper, but for this conversation alone, I would like to just ask. So let's say you heard what Mereani and Akuila both shared. So let's say we have an agency, like in Mereani's case, her agency. And there are certain rates that she negotiates on when she first meets the client. And so when then she comes back, they're the middleman. So then she comes back and she makes sure that she finds the right fit for that client. And then she talks to the caregiver, going through the rates, because that's what is doable. That's what they had agreed on. Now, is there any way that she can get the caregiver to sign a waiver stating that this is what you've agreed on, and you are not going to file a lawsuit down the line, years down the line, just because? This is what we've agreed on as an employee and an employer, and knowing fully well that this is what the client has agreed on and can afford, because they both shared how caregiving, or what caregiving means to us. So is that even legal to sign a waiver? And not just the pay, like maybe everything else that they've agreed on, as the agreement between the agency and the caregiver.
Yeah, I think agencies have to be very careful. They are, in many instances, the employer of the worker, that it's the employer of the worker isn't, in some of these agency relationships, and it depends. We have to look case by case and the facts of the case. But if the agency is controlling pay, setting pay, controlling and setting conditions of work, then they're an employer, not just the person who's being cared for, who might direct the work being the employer, but the agency may is in those instances when they're controlling the terms and conditions of work is also an employer. And so I understand that maybe sometimes agencies are trying to make things work with the family or with trying to make it affordable, but there's a baseline that has to be met. These minimum wage, overtime, these legal protections that are meant to be a floor need to be observed. They can't be waived. And so agencies need to be mindful of that and careful, even as they're trying to negotiate and help both sides. They have exposure if they're not paying the worker according to the law.
Thank you. I think that was all the questions that I had. And just before we end the session, I know Mereani and maybe Akuila and Julian have questions as well. If we could kind of just share with our listeners how to get in touch with you, or let's say someone's listening and decides, oh, maybe I should talk to Winnie. Maybe I should talk to this organization and get some help, or an agency needs that kind of help. I would like to think that that's something that we can put out there for our listeners at the end of our discussion today.
I thought Winnie's presentations and clarification, a lot of the issues out there according to the law is so valuable, and I've learned so much from many of the issues, from labor rights, economic exploitations, and also to the dignity of workers' treatment. And I am just wondering, is that, and I know that it's extremely difficult to prosecute and to go through the court of law for hate crimes and incidences, because there is the burden of proof is on the victims to provide evidence, and so in many cases it might not go through. And it sounds like for the workers' situation, it sounds very similar. So I was wondering if Winnie might have some recommendations as to that, knowing that there are many of these potential situations. What can a caregivers sort of prepare in advance, or correcting some situation, either to prevent from this maltreatment from happening, or to correct the certain experiences that they are enduring right now?
Yeah, I should say that some of what I was talking about is maybe less hate crimes and more just talking about unlawful race or national origin discrimination at work. I think hate crimes is like that's
extreme,
right? Or we're talking about a criminal piece, and more what I was talking about is the civil side. So claims that workers can bring themselves. It's not the state prosecuting a bad actor or a hate crime where there's criminal consequences, like jail time and that. So I should make that distinction. I mean, if a worker is experiencing harassment or abuse based on race or national origin that is to the level that a physical harm where there's criminal consequences, they should contact the police or prosecutors, or there's government agencies that address that particular criminal piece. But in terms of the civil side, claims that you might bring against the employer for the discrimination, that you feel that's more what I was talking about earlier. But I mean, I think you're right, Julian, that a lot of times race and national origin discrimination is really hard to prove. Like nowadays, usually employers aren't stupid enough to say, oh, I'm doing this because you're from Fiji or you're Tongan or you're Asian. They come up with some other excuse, or the disrespect or the belittlement, or it may be because of your race and national origin, but they wouldn't. It's not necessarily explicit. And so it becomes really hard to prove, and for workers to prove it, you have to try to talk about how other people are treated differently who aren't from your same group, which can be really hard if you're the only worker, right? So it is really difficult. Sometimes the legal avenue or legal claim is not an easy one or the best route. And even if you do have a viable legal claim, sometimes that process can take so long. Can be a really frustrating and long road. All that to say that I think sometimes we do have to remind people that sometimes the answer isn't just to run and find a lawyer, or a lawyer isn't the answer, that we should look to our communities and to community organizations or to unions and to our other resources to organize and demand better respect and treatment of workers. A lot of that kind of worker organizing and community organizing is what unions are trying to do when they negotiate to have basic respect and dignity in the workplace. The challenge with organizing or getting those protections for caregivers is really high because they are spread out and they aren't in the same home. And those are huge challenges. And I think something that our communities need to think of ways, how can we support these workers better? Some of the caregivers who've come to us have been supported by community groups like Filipino Community Center or Paulis, or community groups that are supporting the worker when they talk with the employer about the abuses, or who maybe are trying to help the worker negotiate with the employer or mediate a dispute, or connecting that worker with other workers and other workplaces to know you're not alone. You're not alone in this experience. And so anyway, I think that we need to explore those non-legal options just as much as the legal options. And in many ways, maybe those non-legal options are more powerful and lasting and impactful than the legal ones, or should be paired with the legal options. But one thing I guess one last thing I would say is for workers who are experiencing abuse, or you're wondering what your rights are, you should reach out to try to get a confidential legal consult. Getting a legal consult, a confidential consult, doesn't mean that you're committing to pursue a lawsuit or a legal claim. It's just finding out more information about what your options are. And a lot of workers who come to us, they aren't ready to file a legal claim yet. They just come and they just want to know what their rights are, what their options are, and they decide for now they're not ready to do anything. But it's just important for them to know, and they can start keeping records. So a lot of workers, if they're not quite ready to file a claim, we tell them, start keeping your own record of the hours that you work, the pay that you've gotten, document the discrimination that you feel you faced. If the employer cuts your hours or changes your assignments, ask why. Ask questions about why they're doing it. If the reasons change or the reason that they give is not valid, that can be circumstantial evidence of discrimination, but the real reason is discriminatory. So I think those are some other pieces we try to ask workers to keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Was that all the questions you had, Julian?
As a journalist, actually, I have a lot more, but I think it's important for Akuila and Mereani to have any follow-up question with Winnie, since they are practitioners in the field, so to speak.
It's a very interesting to listen to you, Winnie, and I am an employer, and it seems to be a disadvantage on my case, but I'm very interested to listen to what you said, because there is so many things that I'm learning today, and I'm always fighting for the rights of the caregiver and so forth.
Can I ask a question? So let's say we're talking about a 24-hour living. A 24-hour living, just because you brought up the overtime and all that. So then 8 hours is paid at, let's say, minimum wage. And then, but the person, the caregiver, is there for the 24 hours. That's the agreement. So does that mean that if the sleep time needs to be compensated, does that, and that's like going into overtime, does that mean they need to be getting paid overtime for their sleep hours?
If they are not getting at least 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep overall, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we have had cases where the hearing officer or the judge has decided, yes, they were working 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to be compensated for those 24-hour shifts.
Makes sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions, Mereani and Akuila?
I think we have covered so much today, and the conversation has been very rich, and the advice and analysis provided by Winnie have been so valuable. And I think even people who are not in the field, but who are concerned about workers' rights, could learn a lot from the sessions. And I wouldn't be surprised if once broadcasted, you get a lot of comment and feedback, and even call from the community, because I think that there's so many people who are going through this current situations, and if need to, and we would be more than happy to do a follow up, because this issue is so it's so difficult and impacting so many people, even for the clients. So it's not just for the caregivers, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And there are other speakers I know we could pull into, folks who are more expert actually on caregivers specifically, who would be great speakers to invite in. But I'm happy to come back to. It's great to talk with you all.
Thank you. Mereani, did you have something else to share?
No, I am just grateful for this information. Is very enlightening for me. And I'm just listening to what you said, and I'm kind of thinking above my community as a caregiver, and I realized that then I realized that there is more abuse and more things out there, and I think part of it, most of it, because we have lots of I think the language barrier. And as for the Fijian community, we managed to speak a little bit better, especially with English, where we can always do, clear up a few things in conversation at workplace. But I realized that there is there is more serious cases out there for abuse than sexual harassment and things like that I'm not even, thinking about, which I'm grateful for this conversation.
That could be a good start to our follow-up session. Going deeper. We could call it diving deeper. Well, thank you. Akuila, did you have anything to say before we wrap it up? Before I turn the time over to Julian to wrap this up today?
Thank you. I think I'm just thankful for this opportunity to discuss this important topic with you all. It's enlightening coming from Winnie's what she shared with us today. It's an eye-opener, and it's something that we need to address at this level. Thank you.
Thank you, Akuila. Thank you, Julian. Over to you.
I would like to thank you, Una, for partnering with us to be part of this session, and as well as Winnie and your organization support for you to participate. It's been so educational and so informative for this topics, and also to spotlight the Pacific Islanders communities, which is often being seen, not being seen and invisible, and not only to highlight the communities, but also highlight the challenges that they are going through, and that the support for these communities shouldn't be just within the Pacific Islander community, but also from other communities as well. And I think the umbrella of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders should also be rallying in support of the challenges of these communities, and also to acknowledge the contributions that the Pacific Islanders have been contributing to this society, and particularly in the healthcare sectors, which is often overlooked. And these are the frontline workers, and helping so many families and seniors. Because it's ironic that caregiving is such a difficult work, but also it's one of the most underappreciated and least paid, and also for exploitation. So I think this has been so valuable, and I just wanted to appreciate and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ina ka wakalepu, wakambula talitukani veke munina siama tiko mai na kawini kua samai thapa tiko yana Veitalanoa au wakambauta ni lewu sarnakai nda wulida mai kina mai nda wakawina vinaka tiko kina Ethnic Media Services na kena mai teka wuta ki tiko na Veitalanoa ka wakanuni tiko na Radio Donu Vaka ni teka wuti ko ni Veitalanoa na kena Veitalanoa tiko na ulutanga lewu ulutanga mimbi talitunga au yan kena sangai tiko me tarobi na ve wakararao take Stop the Hate ya lewu ya e wuti ko nga mai na ve wakandundui take background inda kai ve wakandundui take wakatamata sen racial prejudice ko ya na Veitalanoa ya mai liutaga tiko Mr. Julian Do liutaga tiko ko na tambano ya and Ethnic Media Services mai wakaitawi tiko kinanda waka Winawinaka wakalebu be irto mai na Asian Law Caucus Miss Winnifred ka wakatelanga kina wana itoke ni Caregiving Agency na Prestige Homecare mai Petaluma Mrs. Mereani Ikanivere ki Akuila Vuira winaka wakalebu toranga tau and Nomu Donu wakaitawi mai na Veitalanoa wakautuko ne lewu sarnaka enda wulida mai kina ka keto we wakongeti tiko yani ke wakai tuna taro oni Via kilana kia ni sao, me baleta tiko na Donu Vaka sena wakatamata Vaka sena vi kataliso, me baleta na nonda samaitu, kanda mai sasanga tu ena vono lewango Amerika, ninge wako tanga mai ni wala mai na nomu ni wakatataroya.